Thank you, Usama Azli. Thank you so much. Yeah, as Usama Azli says that, we have to learn from each other, whether you are Islamists or you are liberals or you are Islamic liberals, we, we have to basically learn from each other. And the most important thing is that we must be able to come with new interpretation, because everything is about ijtihad. We are not disputing the need for salat. We are not disputing the need for saum or hajj or anything like that. But what we are disputing is issues regarding political matters and worldly matters or muamalah, right? And these are issues that should be based on ijtihad, and it cannot be codified in the 7th century, and you cannot say that the doors of ijtihad have been closed. And that's one thing that I envy about Shiites, because they believe that the doors of ijtihad are always open, and they came out with very progressive ideas and progressive ijtihad. Even Imam Khomeini said that you can have a sex exchange if you have been proven by two specialists to basically benefit from this sex exchange. So, right, this is a very progressive kind of fatwa, and you cannot see this kind of fatwa in the Sunni world. So these are some of the things that we have to think about, and I think with that we have about approximately 45 minutes just before we adjourn for lunch. And I think, Elma, I'll open for discussion.
So let's
first.
open the floor for the Q&A session, please. We'll take 3 questions first, and we'll address that, and then we continue with the next round. Yes, please. Yourself, yes. If you would like to present yourself.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Iqbal. I would like to. I'm from UAE, by the way. First, I came late. I only listened for the Dr. Mazli and brother one Saiful opinion from distinguished presenter. I would like to conclude that maybe it is right or wrong. I'm asking for your opinion, for your correction, maybe. The term liberalism itself has been understood differently among Muslims. There are some Muslims who pro of it because they say it's part of learning, and one pro of it because they understand the term, and another one against it because they simply reject it because negative stigma that has been put on the term itself. From Dr. Wan Saiful said, we have to respect others' choice. That means everything depends on the understanding of the term itself. So second, isn't it depend also on the context, whether one society is suitable to implement liberalism and another society is not suitable for implementing liberalism. For example, like in the Western, it is because the culture is being like that. So maybe it's suitable for implementing liberalism.
Thank you.
All right, just that. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Next, please.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. My name is Jufazli bin Sheikh Ahmad. I'm from Sabah. Today is Can Islamists be liberals? I'm really totally agree about the social perspective by all the panelists, but I disagree with when we're talking about Islamists be liberals in economic perspective. My question is, when the objective of economic liberals is more to be materialistic, to be compete in economy, and not to be a complement each other for the society and state, especially from the United States and the third world countries like Malaysia. If can Islamists project in economic project to be a liberalist, but it is not same objective, how we can agree with this topic? Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Huda. I'm from UAE. Okay, basically when we talk about can Islamists be liberal, I believe that Islamists cannot be liberal on this premise. Why? When you talk about Islamists, the connotation of Islamists in Malaysia, we will think about Ikram, Isma, and also Hizbut Tahrir, Halwan. You left that out. So my proposition is this. Why Islamists cannot be liberal is because of the modus operandi in this Islamic movement themselves, because there's no such thing as debate, there's no such thing as questioning the top leadership, because of the system itself of al-wala and al-bara, and also what do we call the usra model itself is not the liberal one, it's the conservative one. So Islamic movement breeds conservatism and radicalization. So because there's no such thing, there's no such culture as debate and questioning the top leadership, these people believe what the top leadership believe. So if the top leadership believe in liberalism, the members would also believe the same thing. But what if this top leadership belief in conservatism, at the end of the day, the members also believe in the same thing. So the problem is the culture of Islamic movement is not the liberal one, it's the illiberal one. So thank you.
Thank you. Shall we take the three questions first?
These are not questions, sorry.
Yes, sure. Let's continue then.
Observations, helpful.
Sure.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Andrew Koo. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the Christian Federation of Malaysia. Firstly, I want to thank Mustafa for writing this book. I came late to this book only in 2014, but it's something that I've carried around the world, reading again and again and again, because many of the insights in there are actually, for me, someone who was not too familiar with Islam, was quite astounding. And I'm glad that we're coming out with a Malay language version, because I believe it bears reading. One of the things that you wrote in this book, which has stuck with me all these years, is the idea of the early conflict in Islam between predestination and free will. And although here we are talking about liberalism, I think to me at least, the issue goes right back to then, whether Islam would accept that there was free will, there was choice, or whether there was, in a sense, predestination. Christianity went through that same debate about predestination and free will. And so you also linked it very much to the political divide in the early years, immediately after the death of Prophet Muhammad, where you have the descendants and the caliphs versus what became the Umayyad dynasty, and the Umayyad dynasty arguing that it was predestination because it was foreordained that they would rule, and therefore free will goes out the window, and it's all about predestination. So I'm wondering whether even today, 1400 years later, we are still really in that dilemma, because Islam does not seem to have come out of that they're still, in a sense, coping with the idea that it is predestination over free will, which is why liberalism and choice is not to be respected, because otherwise you throw away or you destroy the very foundation which a lot of governments, theocracies in the Islamic world use to justify their continued existence on control of political power. And I'd like you to develop that a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Siti Kasim. I am a Malay and I believe I am a Muslim. Maybe not yet a mu'min, But that's the situation. Right, okay, I just want to say that why are we here in the first place? We have this forum to discuss about Islamists, can they be liberals? Okay, we are here because there's a problem, a huge problem right now. I won't touch outside Malaysia because in Malaysia it is, as it is, we are having serious problems with so-called Islamists. Although I don't know, this term Islamist doesn't exist in my mind because Islam is a deen, it's a way of life. Okay, but anyway, why are we discussing about Islam per se right now? Because the problem here, we have to go deeper, is because our religion, particularly Islam, has been used as a political tool. Okay, this is the problem. This is why we are here discussing about can Islamists be liberal, can the liberals be illiberal. It's because religion has been used as a political tool, and this is what we should look at. When the government endorse, a certain view of religion or a certain view of Islam or whatever it is, to be used in running a country, we cannot progress. Okay, this is the problem. I don't care about people whether they want to wear a purdah or they want to pray 10 times or 100 times a day, whatever. That is their problem. But the problem is now, as a Malay, okay, I am being forced to be their view of Islam. I am being forced to say that I have to wear a purdah or cover my hair. Otherwise, I'm not a Muslim. Otherwise, as a Malay, a Muslim, I cannot be heard my voice because you know nothing about Islam. Just because I appear with blonde hair, because I have makeup on my face, they judge according to how I appear. They have no idea what I know about Islam. And the thing is, the problem is that our education system has been endorsed by the government to be in a certain way. Just look at the young man from UIA. He's talking about, certain society may be suitable to be a liberal. Certain society is not suitable to be a liberal. Why? Because he thinks the Western world is suitable to be a liberal. And this Malaysia is not suitable to be a liberal. I mean, since when Malaysia is illiberal or liberal? We have always been liberal. Okay? We have always been secular, and this is the problem. I think we need to look deeper than what we are discussing, whether Islamists can be liberal. I want to say, can religionists be respectful towards others? Not involving. Can we avoid politics with religion? Without religion, basically, that is what I have to say.
Thank you, Siti.
Hello, my name is Christopher. In my opinion, I think I can't draw a fine line between Islamist and liberalism because in Quran I believe there are certain very, very strict. I would say Quran may explicitly say it's a no thing. For instance, alcoholism or gay or whatsoever. So you either be gay or you either be an Islam. There's no choice. You can't choose two. So how does liberalism be assimilated into Islam? It's just a general question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Assalamualaikum. This question is directed to Dr. Mazli as someone who has a background in the Islamic tradition. One of the problems with Islamists when they are discussing about liberalism is that they have this preconceived assumption that in the tradition there is a method, and that method has been devised in the long Islamic tradition, and by using this method we come to a conclusion that Islam has to be understood this way and it cannot be changed in order to suit whatever you call it, the current political situation or the current economic challenge and so on and so forth. Now the problem is the construction of this kind of assumption came from the method that has been devised in centuries in the tradition. What is the proper way to question and to devise the method that has culminated for centuries? Thank you.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Omer. I am from UIA. I hope I won't be criticized for asking valid questions. I do believe that we necessarily need to reform our understanding of Islam, especially in very conservative societies, and I do believe we need to be more liberal. But I do have a few issues with the liberal people who call themselves as liberals and want to push for these ideas of reform. Firstly, I do believe there is this element of exclusivity, as was mentioned before. We don't need to think much of it. You can just look at the panel. We don't have any people which we call as Islamists, as probably Salafis, to be included in the debate and to be engaged with them. So I think we are becoming very exclusive and we are not integrating people within. Within debate.
We had a panelist, but he didn't make it, so... Okay.
I don't know for what reason, but I see the trend actually occurring. Secondly, I do think there is a problem with the methodology of the leaders who are actually leading the movement. I do believe they are portraying this freedom of choice and all these good ideas as something external, not really saying that these ideas of freedom of choice and these good ideas are internal within Islam. They are actually the values which Islam itself propagates. And people who go to more extreme ideas, they think that these ideas are Western and are something alien to Islam and to our understanding. I think there should be also somehow a review of the methodology which we apply to make people more liberal. So I think this should be also included, and we should say that these values are intrinsic within Islam, are not alien. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we should, at this point,
Sure.
start to answer it and have another round.
Yeah, we may have another round then for the Mr. So, to the panel, we invite you to engage on these interesting questions. Dr. Farouk, may proceed.
Well, a lot of interesting thoughts and questions, and thank you for all of them. Let me try to address at least some of them. Let me start with this question on, for example, the Quran has restrictions on alcohol, homosexuality, how Muslims can be gay. Well, it depends on how you understand those restrictions. Of course, every religion has a definition of sinful behavior. Of course, if you're a Muslim, these are the sins that you should stay away from. These are the farz, these are the obligations you should do. The question is, are you doing these things out of your own conscience? Or is there a religious police checking you on that? So I think in a liberal society, I think alcohol should be available. And good Muslims should stay from that because they are pious. Like Jews eat only kosher food, but they don't try to make the whole world kosher food. I mean, they have their own thing. And of course, in a Muslim majority society, maybe some of these. I mean, you don't expect to find pork maybe in a Muslim majority country. I don't know how's the situation in Malaysia regarding the non-Muslims. But in any case, the question is, of course, Islam has restrictions, but are we following these restrictions out of our own religiosity? Are we following them because the government, the society, will push us? And even in the family, it starts maybe like, are you educating your child with Islam in a persuasive way? Are you just beating him up, whenever he does something wrong? I mean, even there, you can have a more liberal or more authoritarian approach. But I think that's the issue. Of course, Islam has rules, and the question is, do we follow them voluntarily? On the other issue of, well, something about what Wen said, very important. As liberals, we should respect people with Salafi, understanding in their way of life. Of course, I totally agree. In the U.S., there is a group called the Amish. They reject modern technology. They live in the 16th century, basically, which is fine, their way of life. We can't do anything about that, and we have to respect that. The only question here, though, the legitimate political question is, does that group have an intention to dominate society with its own specific way of life? And if there is such an intention, how do we deal with that? We should at least have a conversation about that. So in that sense, I'm totally in favor of people wearing burqa if they think that's the way. I have to respect that. But do they have an ideology, a political program, an intention to make everybody wear the burqa? And then that opens a new debate. Then how do we deal with that kind of intention? This is also valid in Western democracies. What if fascist parties come to power in a democracy? well, the fascists don't accept democracy actually. What if they come to power? So democracy will be self-defeating. In that sense, can liberalism be self-defeating? How liberalism deals with illiberal groups in society? That's an important question. And of course, we should not jump to the illiberal liberalism in terms of banning certain practices. But there's one also area there too about the future vision. Do we accept a pluralist vision in the first place? To come to the question of whether Malaysia is liberal, secular, I mean, I'm not going to comment on Malaysia. I mean, everybody here knows more about me than Malaysia. I have only respect for the information here, so I'm glad that I heard that Malaysia has a liberal, secular tradition. And by the way, the term secular, I'm not a secular person. I'm a religious person, but I'm in favor of a secular state. Because I think secular state gives me the right to be Muslim in the way that I understand. So I would defend political secularism, but secularism as a philosophy of way of life is not what I'm thinking and sharing. So these are, again, I think different concepts. The Pope offered a distinction between secularism and secularity. Maybe ism being the ideology and secularity being the political neutrality of the state. Maybe that's a good approach. About free will, indeed, that's a very important debate in early Islam. Actually, today the Sunni consensus at the end of that debate has been to synthesize free will with divine predestination. So Muslims most generally believe in, yes, there's juzira, the little free will you have, but then the global, the bigger, cosmic God's intention. Yet there, what was very interesting there, that the Umayyad dynasty supported predestination and crushed the free will theology because it helped them politically. The Umayyads were, with a few exceptions, were generally corrupt tyrants. They didn't have good Islamic credentials, and a lot of people opposed them, and they said, God put us in power, God predestined us. So how can you oppose God's predestination? This is just one example of showing how political authority intervened in Islamic thought for its own benefit. That's a known story. So I extend from there and I say, let's ask other question. What about certain schools of thought becoming dominant over the other ones? What about the creation of is the Quran created or uncreated? That was ultimately decided over a political decision rather than a religious decision. So what I'm saying is that let's go to all of those early debates. There are a lot of things we can learn from those early debates in Islam. Plus, let's understand that some of those debates closed because of a political choice, which helped the political realities or cultural realities of the time. Which means today, when we open up those discussions, we are not betraying our religion. We are just looking at the historical adventure Islam has gone through, and we are no less legitimate than the Umayyads to have an idea about these issues. Which brings me to the other question about method, the jurisprudence method, actually devised by Imam Shafi, who's, as I understand, the cornerstone of the Islamic understanding in Malaysia. Of course, there is an Islamic method, but I'm in favor of questioning some approaches within the method as well. Because with the method, traditional Sunni method, you have a very narrow, actually, you have a very narrow room of maneuver. One thing I'm in favor of is to revise the hadith collection. We have the hadith tradition. We need the hadiths. Every hadith comes from the Prophet, is sacred and valuable for us. But we actually don't know what exactly came from the Prophet, because those hadith collections were written 2 centuries after the Prophet. So we should be able to discuss the hadith more freely by looking at the Quran and having the supremacy of the Quran over the hadith, not the other way around, as some people in the methodology, for example, argued. Plus, we should also realize that the whole Islamic methodology developed at a time which was pre-modern, when there was no idea of international law, there was no idea of human rights, there was no idea of international agreements. The whole idea of Darul Islam and Darul Harb. Medieval scholars divided the world into Darul Islam and Darul Harb, house of Islam, house of war. Because if you went to Byzantium in the 5th century, well, there was no Islam. In the, let's say, 7th century, and you opened a mosque and started to preach Islam, they would kill you. I mean, there was no idea that outside the land of Islam you could be safe. But, you know, these concepts evolve. Today, as you pointed out, Muslims are safer in Germany or Canada or US than most of the so-called Darul Islam countries. So it's a whole new world. Therefore, it's a new world that ulama couldn't know and think. So we should be able to, I think, look at the issues as well. One more thing. At the age of the development of fiqh, very few people had access to Quran, the Hadith, the literature. Very few people could read and write in the first place. Now everybody Googles, you know, like look at, if you want to search in the Quran, there are search engines. You can, like the research. At that time, one had to go from Baghdad to Damascus to learn about the other, you know, hadith. Now they're all online. I mean, you just take 5 seconds to find them. So it is inevitable that Muslim minds will have more questions and will, with more access to these our sources, will have new ideas. So in that sense, I think we should be able to democratize, in a way, to our understanding of Islam. One thing that cannot be accepted is takfir and, you know, demonizing the groups that disagree with us. One thing, these Western ideas, you know, that we hate, you know, these like the classical approach to Westernism, say liberalism, says it's a Western idea. Well, I actually don't think like that. In the book, I've shown a lot of roots of liberal-like thought in Islam. That's one thing. But secondly, are Eastern ideas Islamic? Is the idea of a sultan Islamic? Muslims adapted to their norms. It happened to be the Middle East of the time. A lot of things entered Islam from the Middle East of the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th centuries. The Ottomans saw no problem having a sultan and Islamic governance. The idea of a sultan doesn't exist in the Quran. It was a reality. Muslims adapted to that reality of their time. When the idea of modern republics and democracies came, some said, this is a better idea because it's a changing thing. So instead of being obsessed with whether an idea is Western or Eastern or Far Eastern or African, we should be able to learn from the humanities experience, from the God gave reason to humanity. Actually, this goes back to the issue of whether we can find any truth with reason, which is a very important issue. In my understanding, which goes back to the Mu'tazila and also the Maturidi school of thought, which is incompatible with Hanafi, God gave humans reason, and with that reason, humans may establish certain truths, even if there is no revelation. Even if there is no revelation, humans could be able to establish theft is wrong, for example. This was a big debate in early Islam. So if humans are able to establish certain truths, that human can be Chinese or Arabic or Eskimo or African or American. So we can learn from that humanities tradition. By doing that, we are not betraying our religion and theology if we understand it in that kind of more open-minded way. I think that's all I want to say. On economy, it's Van Seifel's. I'm a defender of economic liberalism too. I'm not a very strong capitalist fundamentalist, if you will. So I do believe in
capitalist Salafi.
I'm not a capitalist Salafi. I do believe that the state has a role in terms of regulation. I mean, the market, in terms of stopping trusts, I mean, just domination of one company, the state has some role in terms of course, the security of the market and like the fakes and, you know, those kind of frauds. Yeah. The state has a role. Plus, I think charity, taking care of the poor, is a very important Islamic value. It should be private, charity, but state can play a role in that. I'm not a fundamentalist against the state playing a welfare role. We need both the state's hand. We need both the waqfs and the private. We maybe need both of our hands. So in that sense, I'm an economic liberal in a mild sense, not a Salafi sense.
Mu'tazila capitalist.
Yeah, Murjia.
Murjia capitalist. Yeah. Okay. I totally disagree when somebody said that they are here just because they said there's a problem with Islamists or with Islam. or somebody said that we are here because there are problems with liberals. I think both approaches will never help us to move forward if we have that preconceived idea of looking at each other. The Islamists are looking at the liberals as problematic, or the liberals are looking at Islamists as problematic. I think the way that we should look forward is how we could mutually recognize and look the way how we can solve the differences that we have and create a new discourse. What we need now is new narratives and new discourse rather than having or imposing meta-narrative on each other. That will never help. Okay. And looking at most of the questions, I think we have not solved the very basic thing here, which is the way we define liberalism itself. You know, the moment you say that, oh, Muslims cannot be liberals just because Quran prohibited alcohol, what type of liberalism am I talking about? Liberalism is all about having free sex, being drunk like fish or whatever, or, you know, walking naked at KLCC or Jalan. Is that what you define as liberal? Then it is very illiberal, because in liberalism, we believe in rule of law. That is anarchism. If you say anarchism, I would say that Islam is very against anarchism. And not only Islam, liberalism is very against anarchism. We have discussed that in our event the other day. So, but talking about how liberalism indebted to Islam, it's very interesting to know that the father of liberalism, or the prophet of liberalism, the father of liberalism, John Locke was the disciple of the accused of being creeping Islamist in Oxford, which is Edward Pocock, the one who translated the book Hayy bin Yaqadhan into English and adopted the idea of tabula rasa based on Ibn Tufail's idea of fitra, or the idea of free will. So
he also was not Trinitarian, so
he was
another reason he became Muslim, John Locke.
Yeah. That's why Oxford professors accuse him of being creeping Islamist in Oxford. Yeah. Okay, so that's one of the things. Another thing, if we look at the tradition of Islam has tried to abolish slavery with all the methods that Islam did not come and saying that, slavery is haram. But you could see a lot of methods, a lot of rulings being given in order to abolish slavery gradually. You see, for example, in Islam, if you don't fast in the day of Ramadan because of sexual intercourse you're having, you need to free slave. You committed this crime, you need to free slave. It's all about freeing slaves. And if you're freeing slave, you get the reward, you're going to heaven, and etc. Throughout the centuries, Islam has not managed to abolish slavery, and thanks to liberalism, that has managed to crystallize this Islamic goal to abolish slavery. But unfortunately, ISIS came and trying to revive it back again. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it's very unfortunate. I really pity our brother from Indonesia when they're looking at liberalism. They got confused with Islam liberal, which, I respect whatever they believe in, but they created a lot of unnecessary controversials that will chase a lot of people away from the real meaning of liberalism and to appreciate certain liberal values which is coincide with the mainstream Islam. And again, we are talking about can Islamists cannot be liberals or whatever. It again is how you look into liberalism. For me, what I understood that as a liberalism is a respect for individualism, respect for the rule of law, respect for free market, not only respect, embracing free market economy, and also believe in a small state. State has a very minimal role in economy, in politics, in religion, in everything, even in education. And, talking about how Islam, again, how Muslim benefited from liberalism and how liberalism benefited from Islam again. I think there was a point raised by Akil, very interesting, talking about welfare. welfare of the community, throughout the history of Islam, welfare of the community always been taken care by the community themselves. The idea of wakaf. Free education, yes, there was always free education in Muslim community throughout the history, but it was not the responsibility of the state. It was the responsibility of the community themselves. You could see Azhar, Zaituna, Kairawan, the very first university being erected on the face of the earth, was erected by the fund of wakaf and not by the authority, or not by the government. The idea of free market. Talking about free market, should I speak about it or just leave it to you?
No, I'm not touching very much on that. Yeah.
Benedict Kuala, a German author, who's a best friend of one and myself, has written a book, The Birth of Capitalism in the Early Islam. For him and the like, or even before him, Maximilian Rodinson, have been talking about how Prophet Muhammad was being the first ever free market promoter. And Islam has been always going for trades. Islam always being pro-market. Okay, Hazman wouldn't really agree, and Prof. Farouk looking at me with a lot of, but that was the reality. Historical facts, textual, and even Quran talks about trades. Halallahu al-bay'a wa harrama riba, talking about trades in Quran. And trade has been, something that Islam promoted. Most of Prophet's companions were traders. He himself was a trader, and I couldn't see how Islam and how Islamic values could contradict with free market. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, quick one, and allow me to stand. Kalau tidak pendek ni orang belakang tak nampak. The first point I want to address is just now about the economic liberalism, very brief one. Dr. Mazli has elaborated on that, but what I would say is a lengthy topic to be discussed in greater detail. So again, I would say this is a matter of definition, and I want to start from the point that if you want to argue from an Islamic point of view, then really the beginning point should be everything is permissible unless there is a clear nas that says that it is not permissible. So if you want to talk about the economic principles from a market economy perspective, you should start from that point of view. Unless there is a clear dalil that says it is not permissible, it is actually permissible. So in the context of market economy, the idea that people need to compete to serve consumers, providing choice, government not really limiting transactions and so on, all these are things that are permissible from Islamic context, and these are actually encouraged. If you really want to learn more about the market economy, my suggestion is let's not have a very superficial discussion like this. Let's have a proper engagement on this matter. And I can suggest to you that, there is another event, I think Dr. Farouk will announce it later on, coming up on the 18th to 20th. On the 20th we have an event with Hamid Dabashi, right? That we're working together with Dr. Farouk. Dr. Farouk is organizing this event, but we're taking him to another bigger event called the Asian Liberty Forum, where the market activists, if you like, from around the region will be coming to KL. It's at Renaissance Hotel, not very far from here. And if you look at the agenda of the program, it is all about market economy and understanding what it is, understanding the application into this context and so on. So it's a 2-day event, 19th and 20th, of February. But please do join us. Just come to our website, theideas.org.my, and you can register there. Then Dr. Mazli mentioned about Benedict Kuala just now, the author of the book Islam and the Birth of Early Capitalism. But we are actually bringing him here as well, from the 22nd to 25th of February. So there will be an event talking about the relationship between Islam and capitalism by someone who has researched the topic properly. Dr. Mazli is the one organizing that. This is an event. This event is actually dominated by ideas people. You know, you look at that picture. Dr. Mujahid sits on our council. Dr. Mazli is our senior fellow in ideas. You know, I'm hijacking it to advertise our event. So we are bringing Benedict Kohler. Come and let's have a conversation on that. But my the main point I want to make to answer that question just now is this is an issue of definition, and we really need to get the definition right, because even from that question just now, I can see that, or can hear that there was a confusion about what's the actual meaning of market economy when the question was asked. Then the sister just now asked, made a statement about how Islamism and Islamic movement, the culture of Islamic movement is illiberal by nature. She raised the concept of wala, al-wala wal bara. Lama tak dengar benda ni. You know, and there are other things that's been trained, being disseminated within Islamic movement, like the concept of inqilabiyah. You know, Islam cannot be put into place by you know, tempel macam tu. Islam will arise from the destruction of other non-Islamic systems, you know, and this is something that's been ingrained in our mind. You know, and among the most popular verse that we like to quote in Islamic movement is "Walan tarda ankal yahudu wala nasara hatta tattabi'a millatahum." You know, and if you just repeat this on a daily basis, you will see all the Christians and the Jews as your enemies, and you know, there is absolutely no way to compromise at all. But this is the problem we face. My question is, when you quote things like wala and intima and inqilabiyah and so on, I'm not sure whether this is an Islamism and a concept from the Islamist doctrine. You know, I'm not sure, because you know, the real question that comes to my head, I've been avoiding saying this publicly, but that question is pushing me to just voice it out. You know, for the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years, I've been thinking, this concept of wala, does it come from an Islamic movement background, or is it purely communism? You know, because it's about absolute loyalty and absolute obedience to a leader that cannot be questioned. Where did it come from? You know, someone needs to do a historical analysis of that concept. And there we go. Habislah pass membership. This issue on Siti Kasim, yeah, I must admit, you know, every time Siti comes to the microphone, you know, my heart flutters. What is she going to say now? But she made a very good point, you know. But our problem is the government is not neutral, and that is exactly the point. You know, hit the nail on the head. So when the government is not neutral, then, you know, how do we deal with a multicultural society? And this is something that we need to think in a rational way, debate in a rational way in the context of Malaysia today. Unless we can have a healthy discussion where the concept of agreeing to disagree is fully respected, you know, we will never be able to talk about this issue in a rational way, because it becomes so emotional. You know, and many people become emotional for no reason whatsoever. You know, it's not like his father wrote the text or anything, but you know, it is as if it's so personal to him. We cannot touch certain principles, but the idea that state has to be neutral is a very important one to ponder. At the same time, you know, Mustafa mentioned about this concept of burqa. Some people wear a burqa, some people doesn't. The problem is when the state starts to impose burqa, then it becomes a problem. So the point there is, it is about the role of the state. You know, what is the actual role of the state? And I want to distinguish that between something that is imposed by the state and something that is socially constructed. So state imposition is what I'm against. But if it is condemnation that is purely based on social construction, then I'm actually okay with that. You know, if 2,000 people, 3,000, 4,000, 50,000 people say that I'm wrong, and say that I should be, I don't know, I should be imprisoned, that I should, you know, be fined or whatever, I should be punished, you know, I don't care how many people say, because it is a social construction. But if the state actually acts on it, then I have a problem. Because we need to respect the right of people to be stupid as well at some stage, But you cannot legislate against stupidity. So the reality is, there are people out there who we will continue to disagree with. And there are people out there who will continue to disagree with us. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And the problem is when the state gets involved. And just now when I was talking, Zairil sent a message about my example of a trolley, the halal trolley, right? It's brilliant to me, it's brilliant if supermarkets choose to have halal trolleys and non-halal trolleys. What's the problem? My problem is when the state starts coming in to legislate and force the supermarkets to do it. Because there are real problems there. So the state imposition is something that I'm against, but if it is a socially constructed and non-legislated values or complaint, then I'm fine. We just have a difference in opinion. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Prof, may I reply to two questions?
Okay, sure.
Okay, in replying to one discussion about wala and al-bara in Islamic movement, where it derived from. Actually, the idea was a reaction towards the situation when the Islamic movement emerged. Mostly the colonial period, when those Islamic movements emerged under the rule of the regimes, dictatorship regime, autocratic regime. So the movement has to move in secrecy. The movement requires a high discipline members in order to keep them intact and in order to move forward. The problem is when the colonialism ended, there was independence and there was a huge room for participation and democracy. The movements maintained with their initial condition, and that is the problem. And it's very unfortunate some of the leadership insisted on having them, on maintaining them, just to make them remain in power. They are making use of those kind of tools in order to justify their positions in the party, in the Jama'ah, or in whatever. That's number one. It's either them or we're talking about a group of hawkish. Normally, it's a normal situation when you say in Islamic movement, there always been a clash between the hawkish and the doves, the pro-reforms and the conservatives. And normally the conservatives, we started using all these kind of terms in order to remain in power. That's number one. And number two, if the members of the Islamic movement prefer to live in such a way, they're free, it's their choice. The problem is when they try to impose, they're trying to enforce, and they're trying to make it part of their political agenda. So we cannot accept that. Not only liberals, even Islamists like me, we cannot accept that. And replying to Hazman's question about the radical reform. Islamic rulings in the past, just like been mentioned by Akyol, Dr. Mustafa, it always been the domain of the ulama, Islamic scholars. It always them who come out with fatwas, with the ijtihad, because they possess the tool of, all the ingredients on the tools to come out with fatwas and ijtihad. But nowadays, the situation is different. The reality is different. We are living in a crazy world. It's very intricate, it's very complicated. We cannot leave our way in practicing Islam in facing this intricate world, complicated world, only in the hands of the ulama. I believe the world is much more colorful and wonderful. That cannot be only understood by the ulama. You need other experts from different fields to come in together. Tariq Ramadan has written in his book Radical Reform, splendidly, describing about this, but also those ulama requires degree of humility in accepting others. This morning I was talking with my wife, we were discussing over the breakfast table about a lot of psychological issues that we have yet find it to be solved by our usul fiqh ulama. Because in Usul Fiqh Ulama, they were talking about, you know, certain conditions of mental disorder are not being allowed, they're permissible not to perform their religious obligation. And normally they're talking only about madness, temporarily and continuously. That's all. So we were talking about, what about the bipolar disorder? Patients. That now we have a lot of politicians with this kind of attitude. You know, what about those having schizophrenic patients that living with hallucination? They always keep receiving orders from God, telling them to use this and to do this and that. You know, to a certain extent, you know, you have a lot of evangelists as well, not only Muslims, having this kind of situation. So,
and the president of a party.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. It was from one. You know, so how to deal with it? So, in order to deal with this complex situation, and also dealing with political situation, nation state was not being discussed in classical tradition. But we're living in a very new reality. You have to deal with nation state. You know, the new international laws, whatever, international convention that we're living now is totally different with the international conventions that the Prophet used to live, the companions used to live, and Imam Shafi'i or Imam Hanafi used to live. So when they wrote their books, they were dealing with reality. So it is timely for modern scholars in dealing with reality to come out with new ijtihad and new fiqh. But it is not only upon them, they need to interact with experts from different fields, not only Muslims, but also non-Muslims. Because the world is so beautiful, but intricate, the world so wonderful, but very problematic. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll make a short comment. Basically, we are running late, so I'll just say that, you know, like when you go home, don't have an idea that this concept of liberals or liberalism, you know, is you have to differentiate between the two, political liberalism and economic liberalism. So, you know, you might see people over here, you know, we might adhere to a concept of political liberalism, but we might not embrace economic liberalism. That's the most important thing that you have to understand. I have to mention this now, so that, you know, don't go back and think that we are all free marketeers.
Dr. Farouk tak syumul.
Perhaps, yeah. But I hope you understand, you're clear. We are going to have, you know, like further seminars and conferences on this economic liberalism. But with that, I'll give back to Elma. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.